This is my review of Holmes Murder Castle, as you can see behind me here. A 1 to 7 player board game from Blueprint Gaming Concepts. This is a review for the Kickstarter version. I don't know if they're planning on retail version actually, but anything you see here is in the Kickstarter version of the game. If you like this video, please like and please subscribe, and please take a look at our other videos. So let me start by saying this has a dark theme. It's definitely a horror vibe. As you can tell in its title, it's about some murders that took place in Chicago around the turn of the century, in 1900, and it's a real historical event that it's based on. As you can see, crimes in history, and if you're uncomfortable with that, that's an okay thing. I think that they've done a good job with the artwork to lighten it up a little bit, and I do think that understanding this event and how it took place, it has interesting concepts. The rulebook does a good job explaining the historical background on it, and I think people that like the horror genre would be interested in this theme. It's definitely unique. The fact that it's based on a real historical event, I think also is kind of unique, especially for a horror game. In the game, you take on roles of investigators trying to collect evidence in order to convict H. Holmes. Throughout the game, you're going to be exploring the murder castle, or this hotel or fake hotel that he set up in Chicago, and collecting evidence and trying to sabotage your competing investigators while avoiding H. Holmes and making it back to the pharmacy at the end. So in this review, I'm going to be looking at the solo, 2-player, and multiplayer game modes. I'm going to give my opinions on each of the modes and the game. I won't be going into great detail, though, about how the game plays. I'm just going to go over the basics. There's currently some really good how-to-play videos out there, and most of the mechanisms make sense even just in the rulebook. It's very straightforward. There's a lot of good examples in there. To begin the game, you're going to start in the pharmacy. So each tile, each room is a tile, kind of like Trail at House on the Hill. I don't think I have the pharmacy here, but you can see this is there we go. This is like a room tile. In it, there's some graphic art, in this case, where some murders took place. And then you'll have a vault with evidence. Essentially, this is where you'll find evidence. And here's another example room. So there's various rooms. There's also brick walls that you can encounter, and there's some special abilities to deal with those. So you'll be exploring this stack of rooms that are essentially randomly generated castle. And throughout it, you're going to go through these rooms and try to collect the evidence and make it back to the pharmacy to win the game. When you start the game, you're going to each choose a character, and each of them are going to have special abilities, as well as an asymmetrical starting state. So on the cards, you're going to see, do I even have them here? I don't have them here, but each player is going to get a card that says, this is how much evidence you start with. So assuming you've picked up evidence before you got to the castle and you've led yourself there. After you collect all your evidence that's required, you need to actually make it back with that evidence to the pharmacy to win the game. Each round of the game is going to play pretty straightforward. You're going to select a action, and actually I should have had that here, but yeah, essentially you're going to select an action. It's on the cards, but you're going to select an action. Those actions can be like move rooms or collect evidence, and the person that selects the action is going to get a bonus piece of the action. So if you say you take the pick up evidence, the person that selects that action will get to take an extra piece of evidence. And then it goes around, and each other player can take the basic action with that card. This is very similar to Puerto Rico, plus the bonus action part. Once everyone's selected an action and taken all the actions, then H. Holmes will take his turn, and you'll draw a card and basically do on it. Most of them are movement, where he'll move to a room, and then there's some other cards in there, like he goes on a rampage, etc. And if he ends up in a room where you're at, you'll be forced to drop evidence and take a strike. So on your player board here, which I have, you can see on here there's the home strikes. If you hit the bottom, your game is basically over, but also the numbers there show how many evidence you need to drop. So it starts out as just one piece of evidence each time, but if you're getting like 2 and 3 pieces of evidence, that's a lot of turns to pick that up, and you're going to be hurting. So you want to try to, avoid Holmes or avoid where he's likely going to be. And there is some strategy to that based on the cards that come out. There's also some powers that each player has that are asymmetric that can prevent certain things from happening, give other people strikes, and there's some interaction there, which I think is really good. So let's talk about the components. Now, again, these are the components in the Kickstarter edition. The retail edition, if there is one, may or may not be different. I don't know the details on that. Most of the components are actually really good. You can see the whole. Most of the components are all of them in my unboxing if you want to look. But let's talk about some specific highlights. So the plastic cubes come in this, or you put them in this bag, which is a nice cloth bag, and they're actually really good quality. Let me take some out here and you can see them. So I'll hold them up to the camera here. They're, pretty good quality plastic cubes. They fit in the boards nicely. There's actually a lot of them, so this is a good game with a lot of nice components in that respect. The player boards are really nice. So this, as I showed here before, the artwork is pretty good. They're laid out really well. You have these, and it may be a little bit hard to see on camera, but these are dual layer, so these are inset. So you can place the cubes in there, and they fit extremely well on the board. So here's another example. Another investigator. I'll give them props that they've added, female investigators. They've added, minority investigators. They've done a good job representing, a lot of different groups there, which I think is always good that, they pay attention to that in board games. I also liked the quality of the cards. So these cards have a really good finish to them. I guess it's hard to see on camera, but they're a good quality cardstock, and they look really good. Finally, the miniatures. I would say the miniatures, let's see if I can get it to focus on this. Yeah, they're a little bit better. It's hard to see on this camera, but you can see them better in my unboxing with my better camera. They're good. They're actually pretty good quality for a game like this. I wouldn't say they're like Simon quality, like Rising Sun quality, but they're definitely pretty good quality, especially for a Eurocentric game. They have this cool key, which I think is metal, but this is essentially the first player token. Came in there, which it's a nice little thing. For okay components, so one thing that's kind of central to the game that I didn't mention earlier is this Ferris wheel. Ferris wheel is how you're going to place new evidence onto the board, so you're going to kind of know what's coming up. And you can actually manipulate this with actions. So in a multiplayer game, you might be moving this around to get the evidence on the board that you need. And I think this mechanism works really well in the game. One thing I will say is the Ferris wheel component itself is okay. I think it works decently well. It's pre-made, which is good. But I do want to take this as an opportunity to say it could have been a little bit bigger. The cubes, they fit, but sometimes it's a little bit tight. The second thing is designers that are looking at a rotating component like this should really look at how it was done on the Coloma board game. If you haven't seen it, it's got this really good magnetic dial, and it works really smoothly. I think it might have been a little bit more expensive than this to create, but if people aren't aware, they should take this opportunity to take a look at it and see probably the best spinning component I've seen in a game. There are a couple components that could have been improved. So one of them is these Atama cards. So as you can see, they're pretty small. I'll put it up next to a regular card. So we have a regular card here and this Atama card. They're just really tiny, and it kind of makes it hard to shuffle them well. and stuff when you're playing the solo game. The second thing that could have been improved is the insert. It looks to me like it was probably designed for maybe an earlier version of the game, and it probably could have needed some updating to fit all the cards nicely and all the tiles and stuff. I think there's just more tiles probably added in the Kickstarter and other things. But for the most part, the components are extremely good for this game. Now, for the gameplay, I'm going to talk about 3 different modes. So we played multiplayer, 2-player, and solo modes. And most of the mechanics work the same. There's some slight differences, some changes in the Atama, and some slight changes for the 2-player that I'll discuss. So in multiplayer, the game scales really well with more players. Since you're picking an action and then everyone is taking that action, it keeps everyone engaged in the game. And actually, the actions are pretty quick. Like, pretty much, you're going to have a good idea of what you're going to want to do and a decent plan to get there. And when people pick the actions, you'll either take your event card or move or pick up your evidence, and it moves along really, really well. And I think that the fact that you can kind of plan it out makes it better than like rolling dice and random stuff happening and having to look up a table or something. Like it really keeps it flowing. I will note that I didn't play with the 6 or 7 players, but I could imagine that it would scale okay up to there, which is unusual for a game. And I do think that our games, I think, ran about 20 minutes per player, which is what it is in the box. All the mechanisms work really well. I think this is a good game for people that are looking for a horror-themed game with Euro mechanisms, but maybe not the heavy strategic elements of a heavy Euro, like a Lacerda game or Scythe or something, where you're playing a game for 2 hours or 3 hours and it's maybe heavy strategic. This has a good mix of exploration, a good mix of player interaction, and a good mix of I would say quick play to keep everyone engaged throughout it. The rules are very straightforward, and I think it's actually a good introduction to a lot of common mechanisms in board games. So it's good to bring new people in, and especially people that probably, I know horror is a very popular genre, and there aren't too many horror games out there. I guess there's been a few more recently, but it's maybe an underrepresented genre. So this is a good game for people that like that. Overall, I give the multiplayer game 3+ players an 8 out of 10. Now for 2-player, they have this great scaling mechanism. So essentially on the boards, which I will take out here. So on the board, there's this last column here, right there. So this is for Atama and 2-player, where you have to actually collect this extra piece of evidence of every color. And I think that works really well for 2-player especially, because a 2-player game with less evidence, it would be over very quickly, because just the same number of evidence comes out on the board. And instead of scaling that down or saying, oh, put out less evidence, they actually just, built it in the board and made you collect more evidence, which I think works well in this case. I would say, one other good thing about this is the game was clearly play tested with 2-player and solo to know that these changes need to be made, which I commend them, because sometimes they leave out testing the 2-player mode or the solo mode as much. One thing I would say is that the 2-player mode is less fun than multiplayer, and it comes from the fact that the choices are more obvious on what you want to take. And in the multiplayer, taking a risk, it could be rewarding. But I feel like in a 2-player game, you're only going to take a risk if you are behind and you need to catch up. And so it's less dynamic, I would say. And there is some randomness in there, which helps bring that out, but I don't think it's as strong of a game in 2-player. So for the 2-player mode, I would give it 7 out of 10. Finally, the solo mode. So for the solo mode, I'll again mention the Atama cards are too small. So, these are pretty tiny. But I will say that it's nice they included this mode for people that want to play it solo. I know, especially during the pandemic, there's a lot more solo gaming going on, and having this mode in there, it brings that option for people that want to play solo. Overall, the solo mode fell much flatter than the other modes for me. It was quite challenging, but in multiplayer, where H.H. Holmes' movements felt, I guess, controllable or mitigatable, in solo mode, it just kind of felt like a wild ride. Like, am I going to lose or win based on this card draw? And it did make for a challenging game, but it also made it, I think, less exciting and entertaining. My recommendation is, if you're looking for purely a solo game, I would look for a game that's designed specifically for solo in mind, and that's probably just in general. If you're looking for a solo playing game, I think cooperative games work better solo typically, and there's a lot of those out there. But I do think if you're wanting to have a game where you can play multiplayer, competitive, and solo, it works okay. One of the real positive things is it plays extremely fast. You can play solo games. I think you can after I learned everything, I was getting solo games done in 15 or 20 minutes, which is insanely fast for a solo game. So that is one really positive thing. Overall, I give the solo mode a 5.5 out of 10. Again, that's my opinion on it. I think that it's just challenging to make a competitive game work well solo. And I think they did do a good job in presenting a mode that you could play. I think it's, for this game, I recommend it as a multiplayer game. One other thing I'd like to note is I think this is I'm pretty sure that this is the very first game from these designers. It's very clear they put a lot of effort into making a great game, and I think it paid off. I think that for first-time designers to have this type of quality of a game in their first design, it is quite an accomplishment. So there you have it. That is my review for H.H. Holmes Murder Castle. Again, 8 out of 10 for multiplayer, 7 out of 10 for 2-player, and 5.5 out of 10 for solo. If you like this video, please like and please subscribe. Please take a look at our other videos. Thank you.